Good morning and welcome to Ghana Short once again. Today, as you see, we're going to have a discussion with Dr. John Helmer and Brig Arun Sahgal. And we're going to talk of the Russia-Ukraine war and then see what's happening beyond that. We all know the negotiations to end the Russia-Ukraine war have slowed down. The all gas and no break approach of Trump has hit a wall, and the Russian wall is pretty strong. Right? The second point is Trump has started breaking generational alliances overnight. Well, you can break generational alliances, but how do bring to end a generational conflict like the one in Gaza or the one with Iran or in South China Sea and Ukraine and Russia? How does that end in a hurry? I don't see a path forward easily. The second, today the world is experiencing something called corporatization of intelligence. I did a show on it earlier. Well, that's a trend line. But you can't corporatize war termination. You can't corporatize statecraft. You can't corporatize diplomacy. And, war termination negotiations have their own dynamics, which can't be really corporatized. And I do see that USA is trying to corporatize the whole thing. And that's an interesting phenomenon which we're going to discuss today. The last point which I want to make before I invite my guests to talk is that Russia has an exit strategy, but it is in no position to enforce that strategy and take things forward. USA has an exit strategy which it cannot enforce, no matter what it tries. And both these exit strategies have differences, but unless there are meaningful dialogues, they can't, overlap and come to a convergence. Be that as it may, you see the conflict in Gaza and Lebanon, Houthis, Yemen, that is, and Iran have broken out again. Conflicts have started. Simultaneously, issues are happening in Pakistan, Bangladesh, and the South China Sea, which says, look, the world has not changed much after Trump has come. It remains the same, right? And there are many other issues. To I now invite John, your take on this, and then we'll get to Brigadier Sahgal. All yours, John. And sorry for this little snafu of mine.
Thank you, Ravi. As I was saying during the snafu, I was very interested to listen to your dialogue with General Pandey on the issue of how intelligence can be corporatized. I don't share General Pandey's view that state intelligence agencies are inferior to corporate ones. Corporate ones, in my experience, I've done risk analysis for banks proposing to lend to Russia, advised both the defendant and the plaintiff in UK High Court actions when the issue is what's the crime behind the Russian side one way or another. And my conviction is that a corporatization of intelligence is as biased, as prejudiced, as one-sided as states can be, for slightly different reasons, for many different reasons. But you and General Pandey have hit the right note in identifying that this is now a US policy, and it's a US method, and it's bound to fail. It fails in a very interesting way. What nobody seems to have noticed over the past few days is that the nomination for Undersecretary of State, the Deputy Secretary of State, the number 2 person under Marco Rubio, a man called Christopher Landau, went to the Senate for his nomination hearing, and he explicitly endorsed the opposite of what you've just said. He explicitly endorsed what he called commercial statecraft. And he went further. And I'm just going to put it up on my screen so I can quote this to you. What he did was to say, I'm quoting, hard to believe that a Harvard-educated lawyer and former ambassador would say this, quotes, "There's no force in the world that is as powerful as the American private sector. It will therefore be the Trump administration's objective," he said, to, quotes, "unleash our private sector," quotes, "out-hustle foreign competitors," and, quotes, "fight China because they are out-hustling us." Now, this is unique. I've never heard this sort of argument openly expressed. When you combine it with Trump's February executive order removing enforcement against US corporate bribery abroad and internally, what you have is essentially a policy of using money to buy off American opponents if force fails, or when money doesn't work, force is employed. This is not commercial statecraft. It's ancient imperial policy. The Byzantines used it probably more than the Romans, but we're all familiar with it. And it can last for a little while. It doesn't last for long, and it doesn't work against powerful adversaries who have as much money, resource, and force to counteract what the Americans are proposing to do. Second, what Landau is proposing to do is to fight a war with money on the part of people who have only the experience of hustling, of deal making. That's Stephen Witkoff, the so-called special envoy for the Middle East and Russia. It's Howard Lutnick, the US Commerce Secretary, and others. What can chaps like this do when the problems of reaching an end of war settlement with the Ukraine are pressing? On the one hand, Trump says he will provide the notion of US money acting as the security guarantee in the Ukraine. He said it about rare earth minerals and mining. He has now proposed freshly to take over the Ukrainian nuclear power plants. And I think in any time now, what we will see is a proposal that the US takes over Odessa in some form of Danzig settlement. American money will not secure Ukrainian assets in the settlement of this war. Worse, people like Landau, Witkoff, Lutnick, and Trump himself, and the people around him, Rubio, the Secretary of State, Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, and Walsh, the National Security Advisor, cannot agree among themselves as to who is expert enough to sit in the expert group negotiations on military matters, on diplomatic security for the long term, diplomatic framework, or even on commercial deal making. So what we have is a rather extraordinary display at the moment that plays to Russia's advantage, while Russia is carefully, very carefully, not announcing that in public. On the one hand, Russia has announced that sometime this week in Saudi Arabia, it will be sending Gregory Karasina, former deputy foreign minister, and currently a senator in the upper house of the Russian parliament, and Colonel General Sergei Beseda, an FSB general, a security intelligence officer, now retired, to Saudi Arabia to negotiate some of the original technicalities that were raised in the Trump-Putin call, which we've discussed. On the other hand, the Americans haven't named anybody. And arguably, they can't agree on who has the expertise and the rank to match these two. Landau can't go as deputy secretary. He can speak Spanish. He's an expert on Mexico. The undersecretary of political affairs at the State Department, let me see what her name is, I've forgotten. It'll come to me in a minute. She is a former CIA agent. She speaks Arabic and Spanish. She has no experience whatever in dealing with Russian problems, European problems, Central European problems, and the like. If you then have to match higher-ranking Russians by kicking down the expertise in the US government, you come back to the same Russia warfighters who've been fighting this war on behalf of the Biden administration. Before the Biden administration, Trump won, and before Trump won, the Obama administration. In other words, you have the deep state, and Trump can't purge them. He has no one else. The people he has around him whom he trusts have no competence, but they are committed to the idea that money will cause a breakthrough. Money will solve the security problem. And this is a serious misapprehension. What's happening then, and you hit the nail on the head, Ravi, when Trump hits the gas, as you called it, and hits the wall of an adversary as well endowed militarily and commercially as he is, he retreats. And he goes on to another easier target to strike. So, and what you can see if you analyze the tweets that Trump puts out, the tweets that his Deputy Chief of Staff Scavino puts out, the tweets that Rubio and Waltz put out. When you look at these people tweeting, and they tweet each other, they repeat the slogans over and over again.
Same thing.
What happens is that Trump needs the feeling of success, quick success by force or money. When neither of them work, and they won't work against Russia, he goes on to another enemy. Now, we've seen in recent days, he announced these massive strikes against Yemen with very violent tweeting against the Houthi leadership, and then against the Iranian leadership. Why? On the one hand, the Houthis have been relatively disciplined and relatively quiet until now. What's the point of striking them again? Second, the nature of the strikes were decapitation strikes. They were intended, and I've seen the Pentagon briefings on this and the implications of what was said. What Trump was trying to do was to kill the leadership of Ansar Allah in the fashion, PR fashion, movie tone fashion, that the Israelis killed the Hezbollah leadership, and that the Israelis continue to try to kill the Hamas leadership. And he's doing that against the weakest but last remaining Arab nationalist state on the map in the Middle East, and then threaten Iran. Well, this is a kind of, as you said, applying the gas and then hitting a wall and then reversing and going and trying to strike somebody else. It's a display of pointless violence, which some of the greater empires were loath to try, because when you display a failure of your massed legions, you encourage the locals to rebel in a more sophisticated way. When you fail to bribe and use your legions effectively, you convince everyone you're empty, you're a paper tiger. And that's what we have now in the United States. On the Russian side, consider exactly how well President Putin handled the telephone conversation. Great deal of respect, great deal of encouragement to Trump personally, a willingness to accept a ceasefire, an announcement that he would order the shooting down of drones on their way to attack Ukrainian energy infrastructure. At the same time, Trump and his military side were assisting the Ukrainians to target the Kazanskaya oil pumping station in the south and the pumping station in Sudzha, in Kursk. The other side, the Ukrainian side, assisted by US weapons, US satellite intelligence over the Black Sea, aircraft intelligence over the Black Sea, and crews on the ground, the US and the Ukrainians violated the ceasefire before it went into effect, but the Russians didn't. So up and down the line then, Russia continues to move slowly, trying to minimize casualties, encircling towns they don't want to destroy, to kettle the Ukrainians to either surrender or die, and increase the pressure, massive bombing in the Sumy region, to prevent another attempt by the Ukrainians to break over the border into Belgorod. So I would say the Russians do have an exit strategy, but it's slow, methodical, and comprehensively destructive, such that the end point would be the collapse of Ukrainian capability to defend and to fight.
Fine. That's a nice way of putting everything. The Russians have an exit strategy which they're putting into place, which could lead to a collapse of Ukraine as a whole. And then the war terminates itself. Uh, Brigadier Sahgal, sir, your take on this whole story and what John has said just now.
Okay, thank you. Um, I think I agree with John to a fair degree. Uh, See, the state of play as it exists today is that one part of the ceasefire has been accepted by both sides. That is not hitting the energy infrastructure. Now, that's a statement of intent. Now we reach the second issue is how do we put that into effect? Now that has to be negotiated between the two sides. What does it mean? Some contours of how that could happen have been laid out by John. But again, it's important as to how that will be put into effect because that's going to be the first part of this whole process. As far as the Russians are concerned, this is an okay deal. Why okay deal? Because it allows them to continue with the ground offensives, which rightly said, which they are continuing with them. They have continued to pressure the Somi province. They continue to pressure the Odessa, and the impact of this would be that slow and steadily they will gain territorial control as they want to enhance the territorial control and bring it around to some kind of a credible defense line which they can manage to control over a period of time as and when the negotiation starts. So right now we are in a stage of setting the stage for a possible negotiation process of the first tier of ceasefire, which is energy sector. That's all it is. Second element which I see is that from the Russian side is to keep the American president and the American establishment engaged, not to break the dialogue process that has started between them and continue with that dialogue process so that they remain an important player. In this environment, while the NATO is trying to get its own act together to start preparing for a possible deployments, etc., and they had this chief of defense staff's meeting the other day in Brussels, the whole sub cheese is that the role of the NATO is at this point in time not very clear as to how they will go to play. Zelensky made a statement yesterday that there is no question of getting an outside force, it has to be a European force. So again, I do not know on whose behalf he is preempting the whole issue. It obviously means is that this was probably discussed at Brussels and he has come out with this statement because this is going to be a no-starter as far as the Russians are concerned. Russia's position is very clear: there cannot be a European You can't have a backdoor entry of NATO in Ukraine as under the guise of ceasefire force. So the question basically over here right now is this: is that the whole situation is in a state of flux. Then, of course, this Fox guys, Ted Carson's interview with Mr. Witkoff. Now, the way Mr. Witkoff was praising Putin, he seems to be eating out of his hands. He's given him a picture. He's given him a look at him. Look at the wisdom of President Putin. He when he was shot, he went to the church to pray for his well-being. All these are standard tactics, but he's falling straight into this. So, when he says there is no policy, there is no coordination, and there is this whole hubris that the money can do everything, corporatization can do everything, we are up in a very, very different kind of a scenario. And I do not know how this is going to pan out from here onwards, because there are three forces which are acting in a very, very different this thing. There is a more conservative, more balanced, and a clear-headed understanding on the Russians' part as to what their end objectives are. There is no understanding on the part of United States, particularly the policy approach, as to what their initiatives are going to lead up to, and what are the elements that have to be put in place. And as far as NATO and the European Union are concerned, they are jumping around on the sidelines, but they have no role at this point in time, and they want a role, but they are. Nobody is letting them into the room. The next part is this whole issue of European Union trying to create a huge, massive force structure, $800 billion, etc., etc., etc. Now that's gone. That's again, like I said that is a rising dialogue. We had a side discussion with the NATO people. Told them, look, yeah, don't live under illusions. This is 8 to 10 years down the line. Nobody has, and nobody knows whether you will get the resources, etc. But in the meantime, what has happened is there is a strong anti-American feeling which is coming to bear in entire Europe, particularly in the Western Europe, saying where they are looking at America as a country which is letting them down. So this is the kind of state of play that we are looking at. As far as the Middle East is concerned, uh, uh, an analyst at the Atlantic Council has called the Trump's policy as improvisational and chaotic, basically. But apparently, what it appears to be his mindset is that he wants to uh, make a deal with Iran on the nuclear issues, and at the same time, he wants to ensure that Iranian influence, particularly in Syria and Lebanon, is contested and contained. So, bottom line at this point in time is this: is to use Houthis, to hammer Houthis, to send a message to Iran. They have also doing some exercises with B-52 bombers with Israelis who have flown in the region. Basically, B-52 bombers were basically a signal to indicate that we have the capacity to deep penetration strikes and to take out the nuclear weapons. Again, how far true, not true, we don't know. So a strategy of what I would say, and of course the Israeli thing, you guys are much more aware. But what I look at it from my perspective as an Indian sitting in Delhi is that the whole element of chaos is being shoved back into the region, which from our perspective is not a good happening. It will impact trade, it will impact businesses, it'll lead to a greater degree of isolation. It's going to lead to a great amount of militancy. Although the Americans have done a deal with the those people who are controlling the ISIS people, but my point again is the we are looking at a growing turmoil which has sort of stabilized in the region. Houthis, I agree with him, were a disciplined lot. They were not doing anything. The shipping was going on. Now we will now find again this whole issue will start coming up again, and we will see this destability, particularly around the Mediterranean, the Red Sea, and along the Suez Canal. So this whole region is going to become active again, and which is not good for our trade. If Iran goes up in flames, from Indian perspective, it's going to be a very, very difficult thing, because all our oil comes from the Persian Gulf, particularly Iraq and the Persian Gulf is very central to us. And so, from our perspective, this is not a good development at all. IMEC, it was a mainstay. We are banking on IMEC because IMEC is a great economic opportunity of connecting Europe through, not only by sea but through a combination of sea, come land, come container ship routes. That's a good idea. It has got a lot of potential, but again, the sad part is that is all coming up in the air. So one place there was chances of peace, that those are being destroyed, and in the other case, the chances of peace, which was the green shoots of peace which were coming up, particularly in Ukraine, I see again there is a huge problem coming up, and I can see that these green shoots can get destroyed very fast. So it's not a good story as of now. Those are my views. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, sir. I think both of you have brought out a few important issues. First is Trump is seeking a quick victory somewhere and he's not getting it. In the event that he is not getting a quick victory, he's raking up issues to create victory, which is a dangerous issue. And that's the start of a chaos. And virtually he's tracked on many issues which he started off with on peace. It's meandering. I mean, we'll spend a few minutes on what I'm going to now put across, which came up to me as we were talking. The first is there's a huge disconnect within USA between what is going on internally with the Dodge and all those actions which are going on, and the external, fallout of this. As a result, the US policy is not clear at all. What's US policy? One doesn't know. They talk vaguely of peace. How that peace is to be achieved is not known. In the event that the internal problems which are there within USA, which Musk and company are daily bringing one new department after the other under the axe, there's a lot of internal turmoil coming up in USA. Will USA be a stable player in this whole story, or will they only add to chaos? Whichever way one looks at it, it's a big player, and I would like your views on that, and then I would like to shift to India, Russia, and what do we do in this current framework? Yours, John, and we'll talk of India, Russia separately. Yeah, John, your view.
Well, we're all agreeing, and the audience expects us to say something that's new and enlightening of what is about to happen. So let me try. In the first place, I've never seen. I've been a U.S. citizen for 50 years. I've never seen a personality cult created as Trump is trying to do with his associates. Now, personality cults cannot be sustained when the personality stubs his toe abroad. If you look at the way in which Julius Caesar imposed genocide on the Gauls and was then in a position to achieve a civil war victory, the Romans required victories abroad that produced triumphs at home, plus payoffs at home. That was the purpose of a triumph, you remember, a big procession of wealth that demonstrated what the victory meant. That's the one thing Trump's personality cult cannot achieve at the moment. Instead, what it's achieving is more like Caligula's horse. That's to say, to generate fear, apprehension, terror even at home, so that all his underlings, all his associates, and his subordinates are too afraid to challenge his power. and that he then celebrates, and they celebrate. Even Tulsi Gabbard in India, in Delhi last week, celebrated Trump's power. Okay, so between Caesar, the last Roman genocidalist, and Caligula, a very short-lived emperor, you've got examples of American personality cult hitting the wall, as you said before, Ravi. This, on the one hand, is chaotic. It's unpredictable, which can be, in the Roman example, the Roman Empire example, a tactic to frighten and subordinate, divide and rule, and so forth and so on. You will have had many such comparable stories in your history, in Indian history. What we think is about to happen is a series of checks. The US cannot force a settlement on the Ukrainian battlefield, either with money or with force. The effect of what Trump has been doing has been basically to push Starmer and Macron out of the business of offering boots on the ground. Starmer's last set of remarks after the military meeting in London last week was to offer boots in the air and boots on the sea, meaning offshore air defense, offshore maritime defense, no boots on the ground at all. How they can do that against an enemy, the Russian side, which isn't intending to go beyond the western borders of the four regions and then impose a demilitarized zone. It's an empty proposal. So basically, and this has been said very succinctly by former President Dmitry Medvedev, the only serious people at this dinner table are the Russians and the Americans. And they will eat Brussels sprouts. They might eat fish and chips. They might have coq au vin, but the British, the French, and the European Union are not significant players in a negotiated settlement. So, in my view, the military initiative passes to the Russian side and will not be sacrificed. As you've both said, a ceasefire on energy infrastructure is something for 30 days is the 30-day period that Russians generally take to assemble a massive electric war campaign operation. And that is easy to delay. Of course, the wording of Trump's version of it, the wording of Zelensky's version of it, the wording of Waltz's version are all different. So experts have to sit down, but as I've argued already, the US side hasn't got the experts that can define clearly what's in the US interest. So if the Russian side holds the initiative, or to use Trump's terms, has the cards, the military cards, if the Russian side says no ceasefire is compatible with continuing US military supplies through Romania and through Poland, and continuing Anglo-American operations over the Black Sea for electronic intelligence and so forth, then there can't be a genuine ceasefire that's anything but an interruption of one line of offense. Russia holds the initiative. The US loses the initiative. Zelensky continues to fight. And that will ultimately mean that the Russian side will push further and further towards capitulation. On the re-stimulation revival of the US-Russian relationship, that has to mean not only limited sanctions that would benefit Boeing Corporation, a Trump favorite, or some oil companies, or some financial companies, or Trump's great friend Musk. Limited sanctions relief will appeal to some Russian oligarchs, but not the Russian state. The limited sanctions relief has to come with the release of the $300 billion worth of sovereign reserves. You can have any number of of deals that Vitkov and Lutnick can broker to put American ice cream on Russian kitchen tables, or American hamburgers back in what was once called McDonald's. But it won't be easy, and it's irrelevant to the long-term revival of the economic relationship between the countries. So in the short term, I think we could see an improvement in State Department exchanges. Although, as I've said, Landau and Lisa Kenner, that was the name I couldn't remember, the acting undersecretary for political affairs. These are two people who don't seem to be prepared to implement a level of improvement at the diplomatic level, which is a precondition for discussions of strategic arms reduction. So it seems to me, and I'm not speaking in a Roman triumphalist sense. No, there's no triumph anytime soon. What we have is two kinds of genocide, and this is a kind of murder which we cannot underestimate in Gaza, in Palestine, the partition of Syria, and the attempt to destroy the Houthi leadership. These are very serious. As Arun said, any attempt to carry that level of destruction onto Iran provokes a massive reaction. And Russia has a fundamental 200-year-old history of defending Iran because it's the underbelly, the southern border, the southern strategic approach to Russia. Stalin was convinced and was correct that the Shah of Iran was an Anglo-American puppet who had to be overthrown. And Stalin attempted to encourage that after the end of World War II. He didn't succeed. He put Russian Red Army troops in northern Iran, as you may remember. He withdrew them in exchange for a modus vivendi that would limit the threat that Iranian territory poses to the Russian Caucasus and Russian territory. So one can count on Russian defense of Iran if either the Americans or the Israelis or some combination attempt to attack. And that would be a very, very serious conflict. So in summing up, if I had to predict what will happen, I can't see the Americans are capable of achieving any of the Trump tweet versions of success against any of the enemies he identifies. Second,
Thanks. Yeah, no,
Russia
please go ahead.
goes slowly. No, I'm done.
Yeah. So I'll get back to the same thing. The internal and the external contradictions of USA, the way things are happening, and the way the whole story is going ahead, and the way the conflicts are, enlarging slowly, one by one, and Russia, Ukraine not going anywhere, and restart in the West Asia. Where do you see this whole story going? You think the internal contradictions of USA will impinge on all this?
Okay,
And
so, sorry,
yeah,
Aaron, no, Aaron, answer that one. I mean, let's.
yeah,
okay. So basic issue is that United States has, like John says, unleashed huge amount of internal chaos within their own country, and they have assembled a team of principals who are not on the same page. It's like I said, that every statement has to start with President Trump and has to end with the President Trump. So the basic idea is that it's pandering to the presidential interests and presidential needs, and to always to continue to perpetuate what a great person is. He is something like an oligarch, or a very autocratic sort of a system that we see emerging in the United States. Under these circumstances, what they have done is they have preemptorily unleashed a process of ceasefire or reconciliation, attempted reconciliation of the war in Ukraine, without having thought through the whole process. There is no, and in that thought, in the current dispensation, what has happened is Americans are distancing themselves from the Europeans and wanting to do a direct deal with the Ukraine as well as the Russians. Now the question basically comes is this is that whatever deal they end up doing, right now the signs are very clear that the Ukraine is being pressurized to give in more and more and more. The European Union is being asked to stay out of this whole business. And third issue is work on the Russians, telling them the good relationships with United States, the future economic partnerships, uh, trade removal of trade sanctions, release of the $320 billion funding, which is now lying in a corpus from which the interest is being used. Around $60 billion have already been used in Ukraine, etc., etc. That would be the prize you will get for stopping the war. And in that also, they are hoping that by giving the lollipops of economic sanction removal and bringing Russia back into the mainstream, they will be able to get some territorial concessions from Russia. Now, this is the game that is being played. I mean, that's the perceptional mindset of the Americans as I see it. As far as the Russians are concerned, they are very clear, but I do not, have a slightly different point of view. Russians are in trouble. It's not as if Russia can continue to fight. The Russians are in trouble economically. There's internally also there are dissensions building up. It is not as if Mr. Putin can continue right through. He also has limits. He can control his general staff. He can control the narrative, but the narrative control is only an icing on the cake. You do not know what's happening inside, and once unraveling starts taking place, then it's not easy to stop. So what is clear is that at some stage, 3 or 4 months down the line, Putin will realize, let me get the best deal possible in this whole ballgame. And what's the goddamn best deal? The best deal basically is this, is that he tends to get a reasonable control of the areas that he's occupied, ensure Ukraine remains neutral, ensures the Americans loosen their grip on Europe and relocate themselves in rest of the world. Stephen Rosen's article in Foreign Affairs is worth reading when he talks about looking at developing major power center in continental US and redeploying only the limited forces required for dissuasion in the Indo-Pacific. And his other logic is that putting American boots on the ground in Europe under the present circumstances is not a very good idea, given the kind of technology upgrades, etc. They can always be hit. They are vulnerable, and the Americans are not keen to start getting involved in a global conflict or a conflict with a large power like Russia over some stupid troops being deployed for the security of Europe, which they cannot ensure. So somewhere down the line, the escalation dynamics of this whole scenario is built around the fact is that at some stage, the strategic deterrence will come into play. And here there is another rub. The rub has been that the Article 5 is the central focal point of making NATO a strength. Now the issue basically comes about is this is the United States, is it ready to say Article 5? Can it do away with the Article 5? It's the Article 5 basically says the countries will decide to support whoever one country is attacked, they will try and support that country which is attacked. It's a support. Level of support, nature of support, we don't know. But also a fact is that the NATO, Americans can't pull out of NATO because they have to have a congressional clearance approval. So since the fact of the matter today is that he has that number of votes to do that. But point is that NATO's Article 5 is like an extended deterrence, which looks good on paper, but looks very difficult to execute, particularly when you are dealing with the other side, which is a strong, capable, both military and a strategic power. So this is where the whole dilemma lies. What, how do you manage escalation? And my last point is that if things do not work out, a bad scenario is going to be is that the fighting resumes with a much greater ferocity, and in which case Russia just might occupy the territory that it is looking for and declare a unilateral ceasefire and say we are stopping fighting over here. You guys do what you feel like. That can
Fine.
happen.
Right. So what we're looking at is a extended period of negotiations, which in which hostilities might not decrease at all. So that leaves us nowhere. And let me now focus today for the rest of our discussion on India's interests and how we need to look at it. I mean, if I put India's interests up front in this whole story, how to end the war? I mean, that's the basic interest we have. Whether that war is between Russia, Ukraine, or Russia, USA, whichever way you put it, or the problems in the Middle East and US, involvement in all these. That's our interest. But sticking to the uh, issue in USA, I mean, Ukraine. We have a strategic relationship with India and Russia. At this point of time, our equation with Russia is pretty strong. Our equation with USA is pretty nebulous. It's coming through a tough time and entering into another different kind of a tough time. We had an issue with the Biden administration. We still have issues with the Trump administration, which are not settled. In this light, this is Tulsi Gabbard came, she spoke, all that, whatever she had to speak, XYZ. And there are other outreaches happening between India and USA. I'll take this question first. With this as a background, I'll ask Brigadier Arun Sahgal. So, how do you see the India-US relationship going forward, and what should we do? Not only India-US relationship taking it forward, and how do you see this triangular relationship between India-US and Russia going forward?
Okay. See, we have two, three elements of Indo-US relationship. In the strategic context, it is not very clear to me how much of investment the United States is willing to make in making India as a strong player in the Indo-Pacific. As far as Biden administration were concerned, they were clear that India is a major player, India is an important player, etc. They were good rhetorical statements, but when it comes down to brass tacks, what role will India have in the Indo-Pacific, or what role will the United States have in the Indian Ocean region? There was always a degree of dalliance on the part of the Americans. You can read Dan Marclay and other people, and we've had some discussions within the system also. Now, the question today is this: is that from my standpoint of view, I see United States is not directly confronting China. It is following what I call a spiral strategy, which is basically meant on at one level attempting to create an environment of cold peace with China, fight the battles of trade, fight the battles of technology, but do not allow these to spill over into any kind of a confrontation. Uh, we also have to recognize the fact that, irrespective of what is said and what is spoken, the level of trade is around 500 to 600 billion dollars, if not more, between the two countries. So they are strong economic partners. As far as the second element of this whole thing is concerned, is they are trying to build up capacities and capabilities of their allies and partners in Asia, and in that uh, they are building upon the owned forward deterrence, as well as as helping the Japanese statement of being able to develop capacities and capabilities beyond 1500-kilometer range that can hit the Taiwan is a very significant statement, which basically means is Japan is moving from a defensive strategy to a offensive defensive strategy. This is something which is an issue which we need to take cognizance of. As far as India is concerned, the American establishment looks at India as a great stabilizing force in Asia, given its comprehensive national power and capacities and capabilities. It is not clear to them how will India play a role in any Taiwan kind of an environment, as it is not very clear to us what role will the Americans play in a Sino-Indian conflict environment. That remains a very important issue. Third issue is Americans are still shy of investing in co-production and co-development in India. Although large number of initiatives, we have got something over
Whole lot of them.
125 initiatives going on, but the question basically is none of them have fructified to a level to become a low-hanging fruit. Even. So these things are working on, going on. In the interim, President Trump is keen, and he thinks India has suddenly become an important player and important and a rich power, which we also talk about the fact the fifth largest economy, the third largest economy. We have the money, and so India should buy more weapons from the United States.
Yeah.
Dilemma of India is of buying more weapons from the United States is what is called an entanglement dilemma. The entanglement dilemma basically runs around the fact is that if we are depending on American systems, as we have seen in the past, the upgradations will cost us more money, the spares will cost us more money, spares will come with the political considerations, blah, 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 and all those things. Something that does not happen with the Russians. As we all understand, during the 4.5 year standoff, Russians never cut off any supplies to us. Yes, there was delay in giving the last two batteries of S-400s, but there was always a commitment on the part of the Russians, unwritten, that should push come to shove, they will send us those two batteries from wherever we might require them. So it's a we have continued with our resources. So we are going in for a technologically advanced system with the Americans, but the issue is they remain few and there is no co-development and co-production. And my last point on this issue is basically is the CATSA. The Americans are hung up on CATSA. I have done a full paper on CATSA for our establishment where we try to make the Americans understand, but that's an area which there is simply are not going to be any givens to us. So Americans will always fight shy of giving us technologies which they feel that if it falls into the Russian hands, it will be hugely counterproductive. So this is as far as this thing is written. As far as Russia is concerned, I look at Russia from two perspectives. One is an ideological perspective. During the Cold War, Russia became a closest partner primarily because we had Pakistan went to CENTO, and then there was SEATO, and this whole we were on the other side of the Cold War, and we were pushed into the other side of Cold War. 1962 happened, and then subsequently we had a war in 71, etc. We signed a treaty of friendship with the Russians. We we are ideologically not with the Russians. We were never communists. We are a democratic country. We were never communist. We are socialists in our mindset. I mean, Pandit Nehru looked at socialism as a treatment to upgrade India from its poverty to a fast moving, without allowing any capitalism leanings to come into it, because they were oriented to making money, and that would have delayed the process. 1991 comes, India becomes open up. India now becomes sees the importance of opening up to its economy, sees greater opportunities with the West, and starts making good strategic partnership with the United States. So what has happened is, from some kind of a close partnership with Russia, which was based on coalescing strategic interests. Russia bailed us out in large number of times in the United Nations, and as on the other side of the Cold War, India Russia relationship has now become transactional. It is hugely transactional. It's transactional geopolitically, it is transactional strategically, and it is transactional in terms of military and security, as well as in terms of economics. It is all transactional. It is nothing that there is going to be. And the last point I'll make on this is that a good relationship with the United States and Russia provides us a hedge against China. That's an important hedge which India has. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, sir. You actually put it in a different manner. Uh, our equation with Russia is age old. It stood the test of time. It might have become transactional, but it is pretty stable. It runs on predictable lines. Our equation with USA has always been stormy. Our history has not been good. And while we are seeking to increase our linkages with USA, we are still uncertain as to where these linkages will lead us. And we can't completely rely on them. But we need both of them as a major hedge against China, which is our main focus, which we nationally, that's our main focus. We all know that. Right. So this, having said this, I still think the India-Russia relationship is the most stable one of all the relationship we have with the big powers, whether it's with USA, with Russia, or with China.
Yes.
So in this, that's the most important relationship and the most stable relationship and probably the most predictable relationship in terms of what we can do and what we can't do. And we can put finite lines around this relationship. So with this thing in view and how we've come out, John, I would like your views from your point of view. Where do you see this?
Well, I find myself agreeing with both of you. 2 points. One is we've spoken of this before. President Putin will be coming to India shortly, probably, if not April, it'll be end of May, something like that.
It's probably April because I've seen the billboards come up in Delhi.
In April.
Yes, billboards, big billboards are coming up in Delhi.
Right. So it's going to be in April before the May 9 celebration in Moscow. I think that the first thing that President Putin is going to try to do is to demonstrate that Russia is a stable government compared to the Trump personality cult. Second, it's a stable partner on all the traditional military trade. Third, that the opening up of the alternative post-sanctions world for Russia gives Indian commerce, Indian entrepreneurship, Indian technology, Indian exports an increasingly important role to play in the development of the Russian economy. Now, there have been serious problems, and my Indian sources and friends confirm there are all sorts of payment problems, ruble, rupee exchange problems. These can be solved. They can be managed through Dubai. They can be managed directly. But the stakes of profitability for both sides are so great, and the possible expansion of trade and services so considerable in a, let's call it, post-US sanctions world, that solutions to the currency exchange and inter-country payment problems, that's technical and can be and will be solved. So on the one hand, you'll see President Putin as the stable partner. Take, for example, what we've been trying to say about how unstable the Trump personality cult is. Let me give an example of what happened on Thursday, Friday in Washington. On Thursday, the New York Times published that Elon Musk had requested and was about to be given on Friday morning a briefing on China warfighting plans by the JCS and by the Indo-Pacific US commander. Once the newspaper reported that such a thing was happening, it was cancelled. Musk went to the Pentagon, had a 30-minute meeting with the Secretary of Defense, Mr. Hegseth, and then Hegseth rushed over to the White House, where Trump's staff hastily organized a press conference in which the question was asked, is it true that the New York Times reported that Musk was to be given China warfighting plan access? To which Trump replied, he, one, doesn't want to discuss potential warfighting plans with China because he doesn't want a war with China. Point one. Point two, Mr. Musk is a great American, Elon Musk is a great American patriot who's making all sorts of sacrifices, blah, 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 and that he was not intending to get access to China warfighting plans of the United States. And Trump said it would be inappropriate, since he has business interests in China, for him to have access. That's the first time Trump has referred to the possibility of significant conflict of interest among the people who support him, to whom he's giving political power, as he is with Musk. Hegseth stood in front of the president at the desk in the Oval Office to call the reports fake news. He was lying. It wasn't fake. The fact is that two things happened. One was that Musk thinks he is in a position to demand of the Pentagon access to warfighting plans for the advancement of himself and his business. That's inconceivable and very close to criminal and indictable offense on the US side. So Trump has tried to cancel that. The whole episode shows that the Trump staff can't control what the underlings are capable of doing, have very primitive notions of conflict of interest. How could they? As we've just said, Christopher Landau has assured the United States Senate that the State Department stands for commercial statecraft, the mobilization of the American private sector. That's if that's anybody, that's Musk, is it not? Now, yes. When you have a government in that sort of Thursday, Friday, Saturday situation, the White House staff can't control something as vital as military preparation for war against China when there's a commercial interest at stake, acknowledges in retrospect that there's a potential indictable offense if Musk uses any information gathered for the benefit of his businesses. And third, nobody dares criticize Musk or Trump in the Trump circle. Hegseth went to a great deal of trouble to show in front of the president how he endorses Musk, and Trump agreed to it. A personality cult running a government gets into trouble like that. And in this situation, the Indian side has to say, well, we will, and you said it perfectly well, Ravi, we will get the best deal we can from the Americans. At the same time, looking forward beyond Trump, we have to say, who's more stable in the Indian interest? Answer, President Putin will come to Delhi and show he's more stable. You can understand what he says. You can see he concedes. He can admit making mistakes. Well, sometimes he admits he makes mistakes. The stability has strategic significance for India. And the long-term opportunity now for Indian entrepreneurship in the Russian market has the potential to match what so many of Indian expatriates in the United States think is solely available for India in the United States. Not true.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I think today we've discussed a whole lot of things. We've seen where the Russia-Ukraine war is not going. It's not going towards peace. and the good chances are that chaos might come back into the whole scene, and this chaos might spread into the Middle East also, or West Asia. So in this context, I don't. I'm like we all. I agree with both of you who said that. Look, the way Mr. Trump is going about doing his business and his government, this war isn't going to come, or the chaos here isn't going to come to an end very easily. But in this larger setting, India has to make its wise choices. What's good for itself. And these wise choices don't have to be binary in nature or don't have to be 0-1 in nature. You have to find that middle path as to how you're going to handle things in the larger context. Like I always keep maintaining, our main focus today geopolitically is not Russia, not US, it is China, with whom we share a troublesome 3,200-kilometer border, which has not seen peace ever since both the countries came into being. So that's our main problem, and increasingly we are running into confrontation in the Indian Ocean region also. And India has to take a call as to how to make use of its relations with Russia and USA to the best of its advantages. And we also discussed, and I completely agree with all of you, that look, the equation with Russia is predictable and stable. The equation with USA might have greater payoffs, but the risks of that relationship are also greater. Right? I will not say anything more than that at this point of time, because we could discuss that on a later day, but how these risks are greater and the payoffs are more. But as far as USA is concerned, we are very clear that India has to stand on its own when the push comes to the shove. And that's been our experience. Right. Thanks a lot, gentlemen, for this great discussion. I look forward to our next discussion. We'll frame the topic and we'll make it contemporary at that point of time, because John is off to a sojourn in the Europe and London. So happy travels, John, and have a great time. When you come back, we'll reconnect once again. Thank you, and good
Thank
morning to
you.
all of you.
Thank you. God
Thank you
bless.
very much.
Have a
Thank you.
safe journey, John.
Thank you, Arun. Thank you. Looking
God bless.
forward